Elizabeth Baker-Pham is an attorney at Calajarvi, Chusey, Newman, and Fitch, PC. Ma'am, thanks for carving out a little time, sitting down with me to talk about this really important walkthrough of the security clearance process. Let's start right at the top. Okay, someone says, I want to get a security clearance. What should they be thinking about right at that moment, that almost like moment of inception?
Well, thank you for having me. So moment of inception, assuming someone needs a security clearance, which is the first prerequisite. But to the extent we're walking through the actual process, the moment of inception is the application. And that is really, in my opinion, the most important part of the process.
When they're in there and they're filling certain things out, what are some of the common pitfalls that people run into? Something you see on a pretty regular basis, and it's just that, hand and forehead kind of moment.
Yeah, I would say those fall into two categories for me. One is rushing, which is common in part because the first deadline folks are given is usually actually pretty quick. If they need an extension of time, they should ask for one. It's a very, very involved form. So rushing, and then the other is only providing the information that the form is asking for, which seems counterintuitive, but the form asks for information a lot of times that is the quote unquote bad information, the stuff that people are afraid of giving. And so they keep it very short. They provide only that information, but in reality, the full picture is much broader, and that information is really vital, even at that early stage.
Give me an example of that, like help to tell that story. What is an answer where, somebody might go short, but they should go longer. They should be more comprehensive.
Sure. So I'll use marijuana as an example because it's a very common one. The straightforward questions are date of first use, date of last use, do you intend to use again, and what's your frequency of use? So one person could answer that question with two dates, and they check one of the frequencies and they say, I don't plan on using it again, period. There's much more involved there. Frequency will often vary for most folks within the period. So the period currently asked for is the last 7 years. For most people, it's not going to be the same over the last 7 years. And so they're not explaining that, in fact, maybe it was one use at the beginning and one use at the end, for example. Whether they regret their use, whether they understood the seriousness of use given the current social and legal context of marijuana, which really varies throughout the country. So and many more pieces, but those are, very important pieces that are important to include in the process.
I'll note for our audience's benefit, here at this Clearance Jobs Connect event, your discussion on stage, there was so much interest in the issue of marijuana relative to the clearance process. It kind of took that whole discussion in a direction you weren't anticipating. Am I reading that right?
That's right. That's right. And I think because it is something that confuses so many people, in part because they get what they are feeling are mixed messages, especially at the local level. You have someone who has a medical marijuana card. Their state has said, we're okay with this. And they don't understand that the federal law is different. And for a security clearance, that is what's going to be guiding. And so there's a lot of confusion because of what people see as inconsistencies in the way that it's applied.
Let's talk mitigation for a little bit. And I guess what I mean by that is, and maybe I'll use a tangible example myself, say my credit is not great, or I have some other financial element in my background that I need to address before I can successfully make it through the clearance process, or so that I can convey what sort of steps I'm taking during the clearance process. Talk about mitigation, like what should people be thinking about as they're filling out that application, before they're filling it out, or maybe after, or maybe all of the above?
Yeah, I would always advocate for before and during are best, but the mitigating factors are actually, not to get too technical, but they are laid out in what are called the adjudicative guidelines, and that's SEAD4, SEAD4, which can be found online. Anyone can find them. Most people are given a copy once they have a problem, but I always encourage people look at them when they're filling out the form. Because
Sure.
if, as you've indicated, right, there are financial concerns, the adjudicative guidelines lay out what the mitigating factors are. And just without getting into the specific guidelines, colloquially, you're looking at what was the context, right? Someone who had unexpected medical bills isn't going to be the same as someone who, bought a fancy car they couldn't afford and then stopped paying and just waited for it to fall off of their credit report thinking it was fine without any consideration of their obligations, right? Something that's outstanding is something that people should look at resolving. And that doesn't mean paying it all in one lump sum, getting onto a payment plan or working out something that shows that you are taking your financial responsibilities seriously, and that you're meeting your obligations, you're exercising that good judgment.
Elizabeth, we've been talking largely, and I'll put it in the bucket of maximizing your chances of having a successful walkthrough of that security clearance process. You're an attorney. When does the legal community need to get involved for people? Why is that important?
Sure. So not everybody's going to need an attorney, right? I always advocate for the earlier the better. Often it can be a conversation about little topics